Hola mi gente, good afternoon. This is Julio's Daily Chat, número dos. Like I promised earlier, I was going to go follow up on another issue that I wanted to talk about, which is this whole issue of the pharmaceuticals and a lot of the prescription drugs that right now we need and that we needed and that we will need in the future, and how that relates to what people sometimes don't understand when I talk a lot about Puerto Rico or talk about a lot of issues outside of District 15, but how it does affect District 15, because we have to be open-minded to history. If you don't know history, then you're about to repeat it, and if you repeat it, you're going to be screwed like you've always been, and that's how we make sure we cannot continue to do that. So let's talk about the history of pharmaceuticals. Right now, the majority of the pharmaceutical ingredients that we need to make penicillin, Advil, Tylenol, and all of that, guess where it comes from? It comes from China. And at one point, Puerto Rico, U.S. territory, Puerto Rico, U.S. colony, Puerto Rico, U.S. unincorporated territory, Puerto Rico, was making the majority of those pharmaceuticals. And how did that start? Well, it was because in 1976, President Ford signed a Tax Reform Act of 1976, which basically exempted Puerto Rico, Guam, the Virgin Islands from income generated from any taxation will not be charged to these corporations on the pharmaceuticals or anything happening in those three islands. And as a result, because of that tax break, a lot of corporations who then felt like they had a zero tax break on whatever they were producing, they were able to then go into places like Puerto Rico. They only paid dividends on the profits. As long as they distributed the profits as dividends, then they didn't have to pay. And that was an incredible incentive for a lot of corporations. And that was called the 936, Las Leyes 936, that were applied to Puerto Rico. So from 1976 all the way on to about 1996, that's about a 20-year period, many pharmaceuticals, and those of us who are Boricua, those of us who have visited Puerto Rico, you go to towns, small little towns like Manatí, and they had like 3 pharmaceuticals. And they were not paying taxes in Puerto Rico to that point, but they were providing a hell of a lot of jobs. And they were good paying jobs. They was not paying the same amount of salaries they were paying here, and that's one area, But the fact is they were paying better salaries than norm for Puerto Rico. And because my uncle was an engineer, and he was making very good salary in Puerto Rico. And that salary in towns like Manatí and all those other little towns and Ponce and other places, they were able to generate income because while they might not be paying taxes to the local the economy, they do provide jobs to the local economy. That helps the local town. That also helps all of the employees that are working. And guess what? When they go buy a TV, when they go buy groceries, they got to pay sales tax. So that's money that is going into the economy directly. So what happened? 1996, our friend Clinton, he passed the the Small Business Protection Act, Small Business Jobs Protection Act, which basically phased out laws like 936. But what was worse, this is crazy, is that he had a lot of people from the PNP party, Puerto Rico party, right, who were also promoting this, because in their warped mind, which they don't feel it because they're not at the working level, they're not at the poor level, they felt that this was a way to prove that Puerto Rico was not a bondage to the United States in terms of welfare, in terms of needing anything special. So this was a quicker way for them to promote statehood. Not too smart, because as these companies began to leave Puerto Rico because they no longer had an incentive to be there, other than the fact that it's a warm climate, but if you're going to have to pay corporate taxes to the United States now, then why stay there? Especially when you could have gotten like what they were doing. Ireland, for example. Ireland began to attract these companies by giving them a very low 6.25 corporate tax. And that was basically what they were doing. Then they got a ruthless competition from India and China, who were like really rolling out the red carpet. And they basically got most of these corporations to go there, to India and China, where 97% of all the antibiotics, and this is a study done by the Department of Commerce, found that 97% of all the antibiotics used in the United States come from China. And 40% of all the over-the-counter and generic prescription drugs in the United States today come from India. Think about that. So all these drugs that were produced in Puerto Rico, phased out, now they go elsewhere, and they're produced in China and in India. So when something like the coronavirus comes in, we might put a stop to stuff coming in from another part of the planet when you could have had it all along coming from Puerto Rico. So this is the part that doesn't make sense. So in a way, the 936 collapse and these Republican Puerto Ricans, pro-statehooders also pushed for that. They never thought, and I'm not an economist, I just read a lot. But bottom line is, when you have an industry like the pharmaceutical industries that were very huge and abundant in Puerto Rico and provided thousands of jobs, and they leave, and you don't have another way for another industry to fill that void. You have industries that you're going to bring in that's going to produce tires, they're going to produce glass, at the furniture making companies that can fill that void, then you balance it off. But these brainiacs in Puerto Rico never thought about that. So they were promoting the fact that Clinton was phasing out 936 laws, but there was nothing to fill in that void. So what happens? Yeah, these companies who are leaving, the tax break on Puerto Rico in terms is gone, but also the fact of the employment is gone. And also the fact of those employees, thousands of Puerto Ricans that were employed, that when they get their paycheck, they go and buy. And when they buy, they pay a sales tax. And that sales tax goes to help sanitation, at the hospitals, teachers, police, fire. Well, now you got a dwindling base of money coming in because that industry is gone and there was no void. There was a big void and there was nothing filling in to replace that. So now Puerto Rico begins to get into a serious issue where they need money to provide services. So what do? They borrow. But when you borrow, you got to pay. But you still don't have a base. There's no big tax base coming in because you're not paying taxes on stuff because you got a high unemployment rate. You got a high rate of facts that people are not working and making some of the better salaries that we're making before. And there's no other industries that are filling in that gap. So Puerto Rico begins to get into a debt situation between leaving the 936 laws out of Puerto Rico, and then with the issue of the debt to make up for the loss of revenue, of tax revenue, created the biggest problems that we have in Puerto Rico today, where, Aníbal Garcia basically announced when he was governor that Puerto Rico had a debt that could not pay, because then since they couldn't pay the bonds, then they were relegated down to junk bonds. So that led to the situation where today we have basically an island, a colony that has an incredible debt, can't pay the debt. So they had to bring in a financial control board, also known as Promesa, to now manage the fiscal responsibilities of the island at the expense of the same people, which is basically cut back all services, just make sure that the investors get paid. That in a nutshell. Now I can get much deeper into that. There's a whole bunch of other stuff about, the laws. And let me just say this. Congress, get it into your head. Congress was responsible for the introduction of the 936 laws, which helped Puerto Rico. Ask anybody. If you have any family in Puerto Rico who lived there between 1976 and 1976 and 1996, the 20-year period. Ask anybody. They were living in Puerto Rico. How was Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico was very good in terms of education, in terms of health benefits. We had free health basically before anyone else had. All of that was in that period because there was money in Puerto Rico. When they phased out 936, because of Clinton, and also because of the fact that you have people, Republicans in Puerto Rico, promoting it, Puerto Rico got into problems. They never brought in other industries to fill that void. So that's the issue. And it was Congress. So therefore, moi, as a Puerto Rican, who happens to be living in the poorest congressional district in America, that gets a lot from Puerto Rico, depending on what happens. Like, we used to get a lot of pharmaceuticals, go to a pharmacy, go anywhere. You used to read in the bottom, made in USA, but it was really made in Puerto Rico. And now that is being made somewhere else. So in this district, we are affected by the policies that Congress makes that does affect our island, Puerto Rico. And I'm not saying this because I'm Puerto Rican. I'm saying this because as a congressional candidate, I will continue to raise the issue and raise consciousness on what I just explained to you people, how Puerto Rico was shafted from a situation that it also shafted the U.S. and all its population, where now majority of the pharmaceuticals and the compounds we need for these drugs are coming from India and China, where they could have been coming from Puerto Rico all along. Or gloves, masks, all these things to be coming from Puerto Rico. Congress is responsible for Puerto Rico, and I'm going to make Congress pay attention and pay a lot of attention to what's happening in Puerto Rico by introducing legislation that can help little by little whittle away this situation and maybe reintroduce aspects of 936 laws that will bring in some of these corporations that would love to come back to Puerto Rico and provide the jobs. There's a lot of creative ways to do that. I'm not an economist, but like I said, I study a lot, and there are ways that we can do this. And that's why I'm promoting what I'm promoting, but I needed to give you a little bit of history so people can understand why is it that we raise the issue of Puerto Rico so much. And the fact is that we raise other issues outside of CD15 is because it does affect CD15. And if I want to run for office, for Congress, you know damn well I'm going to raise the issues. Sorry, but that is my chat for today. Hopefully we learned something, and I will be talking about other issues that will raise consciousness, because it's not just about getting votes. It's about raising consciousness. And that's how we really win, when we raise consciousness of a community that needs to have much better information so that we can make better decisions for the future. This is Julio signing off, because like I said, this revolution, CD15, is and will be televised.